This is a presentation on tracking and animal behavior for nature guides. Before I start, I'd like to just give a short biography of myself. My name is Lee, and I've been a tracker and field guide for just over 30 years. I own a small company called Nature Guide Training, which is a FAGASA endorsed training provider, and I have been assessing for FAGASA since 2001, when I conducted my first assessments in the Okavango Delta. I also conduct various Castheta assessments under the FAGASA training provider banner, such as NQF2 and NQF4. I'm also a cyber tracker evaluator and have been assessing on this standard since 2006. So part 1, tracking. Why is it important for a nature guide to know about tracking? Well, tracking is the glue which holds everything together. It gives us a chance to read about the animal's recent history as it moved in its environment, even if that animal has moved away into a new area. It's sort of like reading the morning newspaper. We can get up in the morning and potentially determine the following things: the species of the animal in question, which way it went, whether it was alone or in a social group with others, the basic behaviors of the creature. We can often determine what sex the animal was. We can decide from the actions of the animal whether it's territorial or not. And often we can even follow it to show our guests. So, as nature guides, all this information helps us to make decisions on our safari activities, and also gives us an opportunity to chat to our guests about animals which we might not actually even see, due to them maybe being shy, nocturnal, or just simply very, very rare. An example of this would be a shy creature like a Sharp's grasbok. We might see the footprints, but we might not necessarily see the animal. Nocturnal animals like the aardvark, those can be fantastic to see, but we're not always lucky enough to find them on our drives. In fact, in many parts of the Lowveld, we're much more likely just to see the footprints. And very rare animals like the Liechtenstein's hartebeest, which we do find in the Kruger National Park, but very few people have ever actually seen them. Some useful words to understand when discussing tracking. Track. This is an imprint left in the ground by an animal. The kingdom Animalia, or the animals, includes mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and insects, amongst others. The tracks are usually fairly unique to one species in terms of their pattern or shape. Spoor, another word for footprints or tracks. Sign, this is evidence of animals other than the spoor itself, like for example dung, feeding signs, shed hair, rubbing posts, scrapes, wallows, and diggings in the ground. These are all examples of things we may consider sign. Trailing, this is when we follow an animal using its tracks and signs. Trails guide, this is a nature guide who is specifically assessed and trained to walk in potentially dangerous game areas with their clients or guests. Tracker, this is a person who tracks wildlife, either professionally or for fun. Dung, scat, pellets, and droppings. These words are all used fairly interchangeably for the solid waste products that animals excrete. Midden or latrine. This is a toilet site which is reused by a specific animal or a group of animals. For example, impalas and African civets create middens. We also use the term register or direct register, which is another way of saying that the hind foot track is perfectly situated on top of the front foot track. Sometimes the hind foot more or less hides the front foot track from view. Partial register. This is where the hind foot only slightly overlaps with the front foot track. Another term we use regularly is the gait, and this is the way that an animal moves, such as a walk, a run, a bound, a half bound, or even a bipedal or two-legged hop. Each gait will result in a pattern on the ground. In the series of images that I've inserted below, the rocking horse gait, unique to the impala, can be seen, where the animal literally lands on its hind legs, bounds to the front, and has this aerial sort of interlude where it flies quite a large distance. And this particular gait you'll only really see in South Africa with the impala. Then the words track pattern. This is a result of the type of gait the animal has used and shows us a specific type of pattern on the ground. So from the track pattern, we can often determine exactly what gait the animal used. Solving some confusion. Trailing an animal versus trails guides. In this picture, a nature guide can be seen trailing an animal. Trailing or following is the way in which we find animals in the wild by following their footprints. By contrast, a trails guide is a guide that is competent to carry a rifle and lead guests on foot in an environment where potentially dangerous animals may be found. Animals like rhinoceros, buffalo, lion, elephant, and leopard. When trailing an animal, we need to be very sure of what species we are following. Then we need to look carefully for the footprints of the animal that we're following and move along that sequence or trail. We need to be careful of not accidentally confusing our animal with a different type or different individual. We also need to be fairly sure of how old the trail is, as if it's too old, we probably won't catch up with the animal. What can we use to find an animal? Well, to be successful, we need to use all of our senses. Of course, we use our sense of sight to see the spoor, see the droppings, look for rubbing signs or bruised or pushed over vegetation, scrape marks on the ground, and other visual cues. But we can also use our sense of hearing too. We could hear running hoofbeats. We might hear alarm calls or territorial sounds of the animal we are following. We could even listen potentially for the sound of birds like oxpeckers, especially if we're following something like a buffalo or a rhinoceros, where these birds actually interact with the mammal. Another sense that is not often thought of is the olfactory or sense of smell. Things like droppings and the urine of animals can be detected even by the human nose. Sometimes the animal itself might even have a distinctive smell. Touch is a sense which we do not always associate with tracking, but the sense of touch can be employed when you feel the wind on your skin, and this type of touch can help us to determine wind direction. So that's just an example of how the senses can be used. On the right is a picture of a yellow-billed oxpecker on the back of a buffalo. These birds can be particularly noisy and very useful when you're following these animals. And at the bottom there is a picture of a giraffe trail, and all along the trail the giraffe has done droppings, little pellets which are surprisingly small for this big animal. And they have a distinctive smell, so you might actually realize how fresh a trail is if you're following it and you smell the dung. How fresh is the track? Well, with some practice, the age of a track can be determined. Here's an example of how the weather can be useful to help you determine the age of a track. In the top picture here, a white rhino track can be seen. If you look closely, it appears to have bumps and other marks on its surface, which are in fact droplets of rain. They are imprinted into the existing track, which means that the spoor was put there before the rain. So this track is from before the last time it rained. The right-hand image below that is a track of a male leopard. It was clearly imprinted into the wet soil after the rain fell, as it is smooth and deep in the wet mud. So this is from after the last rains. What we do when we're on a trail. Well, there are several things that we should do on a trail, but here's a few key items to consider. Walk quietly. Avoid breaking twigs and branches. Recognize the spoor of the animal you are following by looking for the track several meters ahead of you on the ground. Anticipate the direction and the twists and turns of the trail by looking ahead and seeking out possible routes. Use all of your senses, especially your hearing, to keep safe. I always recommend that if you don't have a great view ahead, that you stop periodically and you listen to the sounds ahead of you. You might even hear the animal you're looking for. Observe the horizon as you walk. Keep looking ahead. You might even see the creature you're following crossing the hill ahead of you. Avoid dangerous situations, such as thick bush, deep dongas, or drainage lines. Be aware of the wind direction at all times. So when we're out there tracking, we should always remember to be safe. Hopefully this short discussion will give you some ideas of how tracking may assist your guiding, and also give you a few basic techniques that you can practice while you're out there trying to trail. But whatever you do, as I mentioned, be safe and only walk in areas that you are properly trained to be walking in. Animals like lion, elephant, rhinoceros can be very dangerous, so please be very cautious. Part number 2, animal behavior. Animals in nature are always doing something. It might not always seem like it to us, but even sleeping plays a role in an animal's life. This is obviously to rest and rejuvenate the body. Injured animals may sleep for longer. Some animals, like lions, might sleep for 20 hours of a day. There are many animal behaviors, and here we will discuss a few prominent, easily recognized examples which might be useful to a field guide. Keep in mind too that wild animals are always where they already need to be. They don't have to go to work or have a meeting. Perhaps the animal is moving towards food or water, but they could just stop and rest at any time. In fact, usually when we predict an animal's future behaviors, the animal will suddenly do something else, and that can really result in a funny moment when you are guiding. Those of us who study animal behavior are actually being practitioners of a type of science. This science is called ethology. On the right-hand side of the screen is an image of two Inyala bulls that are competing with each other. This is a form of intraspecific competition, and we will discuss this in more detail a little later. And just below there is a lilac-breasted roller, a beautiful bird which we find in many parts of southern Africa. Here it is performing an action which we would call static territorial advertising. Just by sitting in a prominent place in the sunlight, it is actually doing a type of animal behavior, advertising its presence to any potential rivals. Relationships in nature. There are many interactions and relationships in nature. In some, both of the animals involved might benefit. In others, only one might benefit, and the other is totally unaffected. And in yet others, there is one organism which is having a great time to the detriment or negative effect of another. All of these fall under the general category of symbiosis. Symbiosis is an important term for a biologist to know, and also for a guide. It literally means living together. On the right is an image of an oxpecker. It is sitting on the horns of a buffalo. They often have great relationships with buffaloes, where both animals receive some form of benefit. The three most common relationships in nature are the following. Mutualism. This is where the relationship is of mutual benefit to both of the organisms that are involved. As an example, an African green pigeon benefits by eating figs, and the tree that it is feeding upon, in this case a large-leafed rock fig, will actually benefit too, because its seeds are being distributed far and wide in the droppings of the bird. Lichen is another form of mutual relationship. This is a combination of fungus and algae. The fungus provides a form of house to keep the algae moist so that the algae can photosynthesize and feed the fungus. Commensalism is where there is a benefit to one organism in a relationship, but no loss nor benefit to the other. As an example, a tree squirrel could be used. If it is found collecting partially digested marulas from an elephant dropping, it has in no way affected the elephant. It's not stealing its food or affecting it badly, but the squirrel is benefiting from the elephant eating the marulas. Another example is an aardvark burrow being used by a warthog. Aardvarks are typically quite nomadic and will move from place to place, but behind them they leave lots and lots of empty burrows. The warthog benefits from these burrows, but in no way affects the aardvark. And another example would be a flycatcher, or any other bird for that matter, perching on the branches of a tree. The flycatcher is benefiting as it has a place to sit, somewhere to view the neighborhood, look for enemies, look for food, but the tree is not affected in any way. Parasitism. In a parasitic relationship, one organism benefits and the other is detrimentally harmed, as in the case of a tick which has engorged itself by sucking on the blood of a mammal. Insects also have similar problems, and there are mites which feed on the bodies of animals even as powerful as this giant assassin bug. Rhinos have a similar problem. This is an adult of the rhino botfly. The eggs are laid on the horn or around the nostrils, and when the babies hatch in the larval stage, they will then work their way into the digestive system of the rhino, where they will adhere to the mucus lining of the stomach wall, and they will then suck and eat from the body of the rhino itself. So this is also a form of parasitism. Next, we're going to briefly discuss competition in nature. There's always some type of competition in nature. Animals are continuously competing for mates, competing for food, competing for water. Well, these can be loosely divided into two different types, but that depends upon how many species are actually involved in the competition. These two groups are the intraspecific competitions and the interspecific competitions. Intraspecific competition. This is when two or more organisms of the same species types are competing with each other for a specific resource. In the image below, you can see two male lions fighting with each other for a kill. At the top right, there are a group of plain tiger or African monarch butterflies. In this instance, I believe there was a female feeding on the string of stars just ahead of them, and the males were coming in to potentially mate with the female. This would be a form of intraspecific competition. The same goes for this group of millipedes. They're all gathered together because there is a large female that is ready to mate. The males will fight and jostle and push each other aside until one of them wins this intraspecific competition. The second type of competition that we will discuss is interspecific competition. This is when two organisms of different species are competing with each other. I always like to remember that an international soccer game would be between different countries, and it's much the same with interspecific competition. For example, a male lion and a hyena, they might compete with each other for food, and if there's enough hyenas, they may be able to chase away the lion. At any large carcass that we see down here in the Lowveld, in the Kruger National Park region, there's a very good chance that there will be multiple species of vulture present at that carcass. And where they are competing for food, that would also be considered interspecific competition. So just to recap, intraspecific would be competition between creatures of the same species, and interspecific competition would be competition between two animals from different species. Predation could be seen as a form of competition, but we usually see predation as an act unto itself. This is an action which occurs over a very short time typically, and always results in the death of one party. Here, an Inyala bull is busy fighting for its life with a lion. In the insect world, there is also a lot of predation that happens. On the bottom right image, there's a snail. One may wonder why a snail is appearing on a slide about predation, but this particular snail actually hunts and kills other snails. On the left-hand side, there is a fly holding onto a winged termite. This creature is called a fly pirate, and the fly pirates actually physically hunt termites. They fly into the air as the termites emerge from the mound. They grab them, fold up their wings, and fall to the ground with them, where they then proceed to eat the abdomen. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some commonly observed animal behaviors. These are some of the things we could expect to see on a safari from time to time. A good understanding of what is happening could greatly enhance your guest's experience. So understanding these behaviors and what they mean not only gives the guide something to interpret, but also potentially prepares the guide for any dangerous situations that are likely to arise. So a good knowledge of animal behavior can actually make your safari much safer. The first behavior I will discuss is threat display. This will vary from species to species. The leopard on the screen before you is clearly not happy. It is growling, showing its teeth. This is a form of threat display. The elephant on the right-hand side has pushed his ears forward, making himself look bigger, as if an elephant really needs to do that to look big. But for us, this is an example of how this animal is showing us that it is uncomfortable with something that's going on, and it opens its ears and shows us it's much bigger as a form of threat display. Other animals like the hippo will yawn at us, showing its beautiful teeth. These are all ideas of threat display. Wallowing. This is a cool behavior to observe. It may be pleasurable for the participant, and elephants and warthogs certainly seem to enjoy wallowing. But it's also an important way to protect oneself from sunburn, parasite infestation, and to keep cool in hot weather conditions. Other animals that like to wallow include rhinoceros and buffalo. These two animals in the screen are performing a strange act with their upper lips, raising them right up in the air as high as they can go. This is what we call a Flehmen grimace. A grimace is another word for a toothy smile. So these animals are literally showing their teeth with this strange action. This phlegm and grimace is where an animal, which is often but not always a male, will investigate the urine of a female by sniffing the urine and then raising the upper lip. This opens the vomeronasal organ in the top of the mouth, where the chemical signals in the form of pheromones are analyzed. This is a commonly seen behavior amongst lions and leopards, amongst various antelope, and amongst zebras. Another action that we regularly see is allo, or mutual grooming. This is where two animals groom each other, more or less on a one-for-one basis. It can be called reciprocal grooming, and it assists with grooming the parts of the body which are hard for the individual to reach. It may also cement social bonds between individuals. Here an impala can be seen grooming its mother, and an adult male baboon can be seen grooming a female. In the case of the impala, its front lower incisors, those teeth you can see in the image, are specially adapted for grooming. Scent marking is another important activity undertaken by male animals and female animals in the wild. This is an activity performed only by territorial creatures. In some cases, like in the rhino, urine may be used. So the rhino will scrape his feet forwards while he urinates backwards. You can see the jet of urine covering the bushes behind him. Some animals have special glands, such as this mongoose. The dwarf mongoose is quite fun to watch when they scent mark because they typically perform this strange handstand sort of position in order to rub the anal gland on some kind of an object above them. Courtship. Many birds and mammals have courtship displays, some of which can be quite spectacular. In this image, a black-backed puffback has erected the white feathers on his body and looks like a flying snowball. This is to impress a mate. Another behavior we see quite commonly is mobbing. Birds often do this, but mammals can do it too. In the case of birds, this is usually when a predatory bird lands too close to their nesting sites. If you take a look at the image we have here, a brown snake eagle literally has a fork-tailed drongo sitting on top of its head. All around it there are glossy starlings and backup fork-tailed drongos ready to attack the would-be predator. The pearl-spotted owlet is a bird which is regularly mobbed and chased when they call out here in the Kruger National Park region. Another behavior we see fairly regularly in the bush is osteophagy. This is where an animal that doesn't usually eat bones can be seen consuming the bones of another animal in order to obtain minerals and nutrients. Coprophagy is also fairly common in the wild. Here a baby giraffe can be seen eating the droppings of another mammal. And geophagy is also something we might see from time to time. Here a klipspringer can be seen licking away at the soil to try and obtain whatever minerals and nutrients the soil might contain. And a final structure which I will discuss is must. This is a set of physiological events linked to a state of sexual readiness in elephant bulls, and this results in unpredictable behavior. A must bull will secrete from the temporal gland and will also dribble urine constantly down the back of the legs. When an elephant is in must, this animal can be quite unpredictable. Social grouping examples. Wild animals usually have preferred social grouping structures which suit their specific species the best. These may vary from time to time based upon the season. An example of this is the impala ram. They might be solitary at some times of the year. They could form bachelor herds at other times of the year, or be found amongst a breeding herd for another part of the year. After the babies have been born, females and young form nursery herds. In other animals, the social structures might be totally different depending upon the sex of the animal. An example of this is the elephant bull, who is normally solitary, and females that live in breeding herds. Males do aggregate into groups, often with an older male and some younger males, which we call askaris. In the following slides, we will explore some of these groupings. Examples of solitary animals include the leopard and the steenbok. They may live in close proximity to a mate, but they don't necessarily move together throughout their day. Cheetahs are a peculiar example of this, in that the males often form a coalition or a grouping, and the females are always solitary except for their own cubs. Monogamous or bonded pairs. This structure is very common in birds, and we see it with quite a few species. In mammals it's less common, but an example of an animal that does this would be the black-backed jackal. The harem structure. This is a structure which we commonly associate with zebras, where there is one male and he has a small group of 1 to 6 females, which he looks after, herds and protects from other animals. And then of course there will be the associated offspring. Alpha pairs. One of our most commonly known alpha pairing animals is the wild dog or painted wolf. Another one, which is not usually expected by guides, is the brown hyena. They also live in an alpha pairing structure. In an alpha pairing structure, there is a dominant male and a dominant female who do all of the breeding, and the rest of the family is there purely as a support system to provide food. Some animals live in family groups. Lionesses, for example, live in a family group which has its own special name. We call it a pride. In a family group, the females will grow and live within the pride structure. Often the males, once they reach sexual maturity, will move away to ensure genetic diversity. Male lions wander away at between 2.5 and 3.5 years of age, and they will move with brothers or cousins, hopefully of a similar age, and they form what we call coalitions. A coalition is a group of related males. The matriarchy. This is an interesting group structure where the entire social organization of the animal is dominated by one mature female. In the case of hyenas, specifically the spotted hyena, there is a dominant or alpha female who is in charge of all the comings and goings of the clan. In the case of elephants, there is usually one older, wiser female who plays the role of leader for the entire family group. Males are not part of these groups on any sort of a permanent level, and they tend to come and go as they need to. But where males are involved in the hyenas, they play a very subordinate role. Temporary associations. Animals like bull buffaloes and giraffes will form temporary associations. One day there might be one of them, the next day it might be hanging around with some others of its own species, and this can vary from day to day with no fixed or permanent structure. Oligarchy. Baboons are well known for living in an oligarchic society. This is where there are multiple males, each leading small factions within the troop. Within a troop of baboons, there could be 2 or 3 or 5 or even more big males, which have some access to females and are in charge of their own small subgroups. The caste system. This is not a particularly common sort of social grouping, but in a caste or caste system, each individual insect fits into a specific category with a specific sort of function. In the termites, for example, there will be the breeding animals, which would be the queen and the various drones. There would be workers, there would be soldiers, and everybody would know their particular function. Bees, ants, and termites are examples of insects with a caste system. Another structure which we find quite interesting is that of the arena or lek. This is where, mostly in birds, the male animal will hold a small territory, often within view of other males, and there they will perform and display and try to impress the females that are standing on the periphery of this whole situation and choosing which male they think is best. One mammal which regularly performs in an arena or lek is the red lechwe, but to see this animal you would need to travel to the Okavango Delta. Coloration types and functions. It's a well-known fact of biology that the form of an animal follows its function. This basically means that if an animal spends its life doing a particular thing, then a part of its body would be designed to facilitate that. An example would be an aardvark with its powerful large clawed design, specially made for digging, or a leopard and its incredible muscle and foot design for climbing trees, or a cheetah with its whole body plan designed for speed. Well, this is also true of color. In the following slides, we will discuss some of the uses of the fur or skin color of some of these animals and how they may be used in nature to provide an advantage to the animal. Aposematic coloration. In the case of the insect world, where all insects see wonderful colors, bright reds, yellows, and oranges often imply that an animal is dangerous or not good to eat. In this picture, a caterpillar has erected a pair of osmeterium out of the back of the head. These are just simply a warning to other animals not to eat it. In the case of mammals, most of which don't really see great color, bold black on gray or black on white markings will play the same sort of role. The African civet has an anal gland and can secrete a noxious, foul-smelling fluid. Camouflage. This is a very important type of coloration. It can be used for predation and it can be used for defense against predators. In the top right image, there is a long-spinnered spider against the trunk of a tree. It's really hard to see. In the image below that, there is a triogama. The triogama is perfectly designed to look just like the bark. No discussion on camouflage would really be complete in terms of the African context without mentioning the chameleon that can often take on the background color as its own color. Disruptive markings. These are quite common in nature. In this instance, we can see a young Inyala with its white stripes against the red background. This is to potentially break up the body's outline. Other animals that have the same markings would be animals like kudu. In the zebra and the giraffe, there are also disruptive markings. If we were predators, we would not be able to see in color. So I've modified this image to show what a predator might see if it was looking at this zebra and giraffe that are in the image. Some animals have super bright colors. This is common in reptiles and in birds, and typically it's the male that takes on this role. This is to show how bright and fit and strong the animal is, and that it has the resources to create these colors within its body. Some animals have what we call deceptive markings. This is a dice moth caterpillar. All of these peculiar growths and structures which stick out of the body are a form of unusual protection. There are wasps out there who want to spend their lives searching for these insects and inserting their eggs into their bodies. Now, when the eggs start to develop, they often form little structures on the outside of the body, like the ones that can be seen here. And these are in fact the eggs of a wasp that have been laid on the body. Now, if the wasp arrives and sees these structures already in place, it may decide to just move along because it feels like this animal has already been parasitized. How incredibly clever is that? And of course, some animals take on coloration to mimic. This is quite a toxic creature. This is a butterfly that, if ingested or eaten, would have poisons within its body. It's part of the group called the acreas. But in some instances, birds want to hunt these butterflies. But once you've eaten your first acrea, you'll probably be quite put off. So many insects, many types of butterflies, will mimic these colors so that they don't get eaten or preyed upon by birds. Well, that's the end of this presentation. I hope that you found it informative.